And hello from Philadelphia. Frank here with yet another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. A very interesting period we're in now in terms of UFO news. I'm going to get to that. But before I do, just a quick and dirty update on the Unidentified show. I've been able to watch episodes 2 and 3 since we last spoke. And again, it seems to be continuing that TTSA, because of their high profile, out there in the world, has been able to entice and attract a number of excellent witnesses to come forward and talk about their UFO experiences that happened, obviously, in the first week, again, last week with the Triangle Mystery episode, and then again, finally, in this week with the UFO and nukes, and that is a very nice thing. One thing that I think they have to be cautious of is lapsing into doing the type of show that virtually any UFO show can be. There's no sense in these guys and their position basically treading over too much old ground. So it's good to see that they are generating some new witnesses, some new cases. That is always some interesting stuff. Looking forward ahead, the 5 episodes remaining in this season, there's going to be a show regarding airline encounters. Apparently they've also been able to entice some airline pilots to come forward. They're going to do a show on apparently extraterrestrial encounters. I don't know if that means they're going to be dealing with experiencers. If it is, that certainly would be interesting. They really haven't gone too much directly into that, although we do know it's a topic of interest. And also, I guess looks like there's going to be an episode on sighting surge. And if you can recall, going back 2.5 years now already, a quarter of a decade, one of the things that we're talking about is an increase in sightings. They've really provided no data to back up that claim. It'll be interesting if they do provide it. I'm going to touch more on sightings and the frequency of really good cases as we go forward here. But I do want to recommend the show. Again, I'm not going to break down every segment of the program tonight or last week. You can watch it for yourself. It's readily available. So go ahead and take a look at that. And going forward, let's talk about a key bit of news that happened during the past week regarding the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence's bill that will ask the UAP task force to provide a unclassified report that we're all going to get to see down the road. And that, of course, looks very interesting. Of course, as I mentioned, that bill did overwhelmingly pass in the Senate. It does need to go to the House and then finally to the President for signing off on and becoming law. So we're still probably at the very quickest. We're probably looking at seeing something from this maybe second quarter of next year. So this is still a ways away. But we did get some very interesting comments from both Marco Rubio in an interview with Jim DeFade, who is a reporter for the CBS affiliate down in Miami. He asked about, DeFade asked Rubio about it. It was not something that Rubio volunteered, but up to this point, it seemed like Mark Warner was certainly the more vocal member of this committee, the vice chair of the committee, in terms of wanting more information about these types of cases and contacting the Navy to find out more. And that apparently was stymied, but they decided to go this route. And it's quite surprising and very pleasing that we see Rubio is on board with this. His name got bandied about when news of this little segment of the bill came forward, that this is his baby. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I do still think that Warner is the driver here. He's the catalyst for getting this in there. But Rubio seems well on board. Very interesting because this is, of course, something that you don't see too much bipartisanship in Congress these days. Yet we're seeing a Republican and a Democrat both seeming to be well on board in terms of wanting more information about the UFOs. So let's go to the interview, go to the audio on the interview with DeFade and Rubio, and listen to what the senator has to say in his own words.
Are we alone? No, look, here's the interesting thing for me about all this, and the reason why I think it's an important topic, okay? And that is we have things flying over our military bases and places where we're conducting military exercises, and we don't know what it is, and it isn't ours. So that's the legitimate question to ask. I would say that, frankly, that if it's something of outside this planet, that might actually be better than the fact that we've seen some technological leap on behalf of the Chinese or the Russians or some other adversary that allows them to conduct this sort of activity. But the bottom line is, if there are things flying over your military bases and you don't know what they are because they're not yours, and they exhibit potentially technologies that you don't have at your own disposal, that to me is a national security risk and one that we should be looking into. And so that's the premise I begin with.
Let's clear this up. Who would be looking into this? And they would be generating some sort of a publicly available report on, you're not using the phrase unidentified flying objects. You have another euphemism for it, unidentified aerial phenomenon, which is not.
I didn't come up with that. That's the one that the military uses internally, and ultimately, that's the one we used. And what we're saying, so the Office of Naval Intelligence, this is has impacted the Navy for the most part. I've seen reports on this now for the better part of a decade. Other countries have had similar reports, and so. But for our perspective is, there is someone flying in the airspace that no one else is allowed to fly in, and we don't know who it is, and it isn't something we have. We need to know what that is. I mean, that's in my mind. I mean, I don't understand why we wouldn't want to know what it is. Maybe there's a completely sort of boring explanation for it, but we need to find out. And so that's really what we're asking about, and we're asking them to make public as much as possible that information. None of that really fits into the mold of classified per se.
All right, but what's your gut? Are we alone in the universe, or is there something else out there?
I don't have a gut feeling about it because it's a phenomenon. It's unexplained. I just want to know what it is. And if we can't determine what it is, then that's a fact point we need to take into account. I wouldn't venture to speculate beyond that.
Are we alone?
Well, it was some very interesting comments there from Rubio, where he basically is saying, at least early on, that he would prefer perhaps that some of these UFOs be ET rather than some foreign adversary. I thought that was a very interesting comment. It did not care to speculate any further about that particular topic, but there it is. And again, he seemed well on board, seemed well up on the issue, and has his position down. Again, it's important to point out it wasn't something he volunteered. He was asked about it, and when he did, he answered and gave a credible answer. I thought he came off very, very well and all that. And also, we had comments this week from Mark Warner, and let's go to Warner's comments here. Hang on a sec. Let me pull that audio file up, and let's give a listen to Warner, who I do still think took the lead. But again, like I said, it was very nice to see Rubio answer very credibly when he was asked about this by the Miami reported defeat.
Well, I'm not going to get into any details on classified information. I have received a similar brief over a year ago. I need to get an update as well. And, I'm concerned about anything that might threaten the health and well-being of, our pilots. We've got a lot of those pilots that fly out of Oceana, that fly out of Hampton Roads. If there is anything that is disturbing their flight patterns or potentially a threat, I think it's appropriate that the Navy and the armed forces generally take this into consideration. But in terms of the specifics, that remains classified. I'm the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about classified information, but I think it's appropriate that the Pentagon keeps Senator Rubio and I and other members of the committee informed. Again, I've heard nothing about the status of the DNI report, and we'll just have to stay tuned. Again, I'm not going to, no matter how many times you ask, I'm not going to talk about things that are classified. I am going to say, though, that the Pentagon ought to be doing everything it would be appropriate to protect the safety and well-being of our planes and our pilots. Again, I'm not going to get into what is going on. I think, as a leader of the Intelligence Committee, I think it's appropriate that we stay informed. But part of my challenge is be briefed with classified information is to keep that classified.
And there is that from Warner. You see or hear the vice chair in Warner and the acting chair in Rubio, both well on board. They want answers. This is pretty much unprecedented. I can't think of any point in time where you
this
saw...
season is for the fans.
Hang on a sec.
Even when the pros went dark, we still found a way to light.
Let's get out of there. Sorry about that. But as far as I know, this is unprecedented. When you hear the chair and the vice chair both from opposing parties, both wanting to know more about UFOs. This is quite fantastic. So very definitely very happy about this, but again, it's going to take a while to play out. The bill where they're requesting this report still needs to get through the House, still needs to get signed off on by the Senate. Some good news, of course, was that the bill did pass the Senate overwhelmingly. Obviously, the part about the UFO report is a very small piece of a much larger bill that has apparently also been merged with another even larger bill. So these bills are enormous. This is just one small detail in it, but of course it is a detail that fascinates us greatly. So yeah, we like this. This is some very good news. And again, I would say two politicians, one from each of the opposing major parties, all on board looking for UFO information. Yeah. This is unprecedented to the best of my knowledge, and if anybody can point to a case in the past where we've had something like this before, I'd like to know about it. I can tell you that back in the 60s, when Gerald Ford was a representative, a congressman from Michigan, he was able to get an open House hearing on UFOs back in the 60s. Very interesting proceedings, but that was a long time ago, and I believe it was just simply Ford's power, a man acting alone, because his constituents were well up in arms over a series of UFO cases in Michigan, was able to get that done. This is bipartisan. This is interesting. And this is, again, as far as I know, quite unprecedented. So we like this. This is outstanding news. And it leads into our next story. And let's go to this New York Times story that came out on Thursday. A lot of talk leading up to this. I think everybody who follows the UFO story closely was aware that something was coming from them. A pretty safe bet. The talk that obviously a lot of people raised questions about and didn't think it was going to happen was that the story does touch on crash retrievals. They expressed some skepticism about that, but we knew this was coming, that Blumenthal and Keene have both been kicking the tires on this aspect of the story for a while. The story itself, I think, was maybe a bit of a disappointment. I was frankly surprised that it really did not dig too deep on this subject, since so much is known about debris and crash retrievals in the past. I'll get into that in a moment. But basically, some of the key quotes from the story, no crash artifacts have been publicly produced for independent verification. Some retrieved objects, such as unusual metallic fragments, were later identified from laboratory studies as man-made. Again, that's not entirely accurate, but we'll get into that momentarily. It is extremely important that information about the discovery of physical materials or retrieved craft come out, he said, he being Harry Reid in that particular instance. And then later on, and apparently they interviewed Eric Davis as well. Mr. Davis, who now works for Aerospace Corporation, a defense contractor, said he gave a classified briefing to a Defense Department agency as recently as March about retrievals from off-world vehicles not made of this Earth. Mr. Davis said he also gave classified briefings on retrievals of unexplained objects to staff members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on October 21, 2019, and staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee 2 days later. Certainly quite possible. Don't know the details that Davis has, but I'll tell you that nothing classified coming up here. We're going to be talking a little bit about some of these anomalous materials that have been turned up and about crash retrievals. So hold on to your hats. You'll get a lot more details from right here than you did from the New York Times article. Again, pretty surprising that the article itself was really truncated, 1,000 words, and roughly half of them were related to the Senate bill that Rubio and Warner are championing. So again, not a whole lot of detail, but at least it's out there. One thing that, let me get to this first. After the story came out, Harry Reid issued a statement that basically saying that he was misquoted in the article. Reid saying, "I have no knowledge and I've never suggested the federal government or any entity as unidentified flying objects or debris from other worlds. I've consistently said that we must stick to science, not fairy tales about little green men." And let's see here from the Times, despite Pentagon statements that it's disbanded a once covert program to investigate unidentified flying objects. That's basically just the top of the story. But that was Reid's statement. Apparently, he took issue in what was described in an interview today with Project Unity by both Blumenthal and Leslie Kean as basically a paraphrase. And apparently, Reid did take exception to that paraphrasing, although they did stand by the quotes. This is just it's a small thing. I can understand. Sometimes you see things in print, you have a conversation with somebody, you say something. Maybe you did say what they paraphrased, and maybe the paraphrasing is accurate, but that wasn't your intent. Lots of times those kind of things can happen. I wouldn't put too much weight on this. I think we just have to move forward. Okay, Reid had his caveat with the story, and basically they just went forward with it from there. But what is really interesting to me is that there wasn't a lot of context to this story, and Leslie Kean has worked in the past regarding crash retrieval cases specifically. Again, no kind of context, that there are these stories out there, that they have been floating around for some time. NASA's decision to reopen its file, this is from a few years back. Looks like, let's see, not even sure what site I grabbed this from. But anyway, I do remember when this happened. NASA's decision to reopen its files is the latest phase of a legal battle prompted by journalist Leslie Kean's Freedom of Information Act request, filed in 2003 and subsequently fought by the space agency in March. A judge rejected NASA's request to have the case thrown out of court. So she was digging in on Kecksburg, which I do think is a genuine crash retrieval case. Was it ET? Well, I'm not so sure. But again, it's crash retrieval. It's an interesting case. We'd certainly like to know more about. And let's get into, again, Reid saying he not being aware of any entity examining this kind of anomalous debris. Well, I'm not questioning that he might not be aware of it, but I am, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. There is this very curious Ubatuba material. This has been studied at length by Professor Peter Sturrock. He sent the material to more than a couple dozen different laboratories at various times, sent it out, had it tested, got it back. This goes back to roughly the 2000 era. And his conclusion at the end, as far as anyone can tell from analyses carried out to date, there is no case for believing that the Brazil magnesium specimens had an extraterrestrial origin. On the other hand, it is not proved possible to identify where the material was produced. So there you have that. A very cautious scientist is going to be very cautious in terms of his language. And again, that is about I think the best that we're going to get regarding these types of fragments. But again, they are interesting. And of course, back in 2017, Jacques Vallée, in a presentation at Contact in the Desert, went through his findings regarding material composition of UFOs. He had studied a number of different samples along with Dr. Gary Nolan from from Stanford. And if you remember, very early on in all this, in that very first New York Times article in December 2017, they did talk a little bit about these types of fragments. This is a list of cases that Vallée is familiar with. Obviously, he hasn't studied them all, but there are a few of them out there. And the Ubatuba material looks like he got to study something from Bogota in Colombia, something from Iowa, and something from Sierra. So he was able to take a look at those. The focus of the study was very much on the isotopic ratios of this particular material, and basically, the idea there is by studying the isotopic ratios, we have a pretty good idea that the elements in our universe are pretty much the same everywhere, but either one of two things are possible, as he outlines here, that the isotopic ratios were manipulated, which allows for greater performance, or perhaps because the stars where those elements were created are somewhat different, it results in different isotopic ratios. So a summary of Vallée's findings: certain metal materials are seen to contain trace levels of elements and isotopes of said elements, which no man-made or terrestrial metals would be expected to contain. Are these contaminants or purposely introduced, engineered? 2, technical analysis needs to be expanded through the use of several instruments to arrive at more precise composition tables. No analysis from a single instrument or method is fully reliable. 3, we plan an aggressive program of search for additional samples in order to reach a general picture on the entire problem. And finally, abnormal isotope ratios does not mean ET origin. So again, basically saying this stuff is interesting, we should take a closer look, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's ET. And that's about where we're at on that. But those studies have taken place. Now, what does the government have? What does the military have? And you know that they've got access to all sorts of fantastic equipment within their own labs, or can certainly farm out this type of work to very high-end laboratories that are capable of these types of studies. They can certainly do that. One thing that is important to remember, that isotopic ratios can be not so much manipulated, but altered through normal manufacturing processes, that some of the lighter isotopes can burn off. So again, as Vallée points out, just because the isotopic ratios are a little bit out of the ordinary doesn't necessarily mean ET. So there's that. Now, let's talk a little bit about acquiring foreign technology. This is a very interesting subject, and there are some extraordinary cases that we do know about. And one that I just became familiar with within the last week or so regards the Luna satellite, which went to the moon, and a Soviet-built satellite. And so what basically happened, and I urge everybody to look this up, really fascinating stuff, but basically what the Soviets did, they were so proud of their accomplishments, they actually took a legitimate Luna spacecraft, and they actually put it on display at various museums, just kind of, as an expression of pride in what they had done. And no question that the Soviets, right up probably until Apollo 8, when we were actually able to orbit men around the moon and bring them back, that was pretty much every space threshold, every space milestone was accomplished by the Soviets. And they did get their gear to the moon before we did. We got men there before they did, but they got gear there before we did. So among the artifacts were a Sputnik and a Lunik upper stage that contained the payload. The latter, freshly painted with viewing windows cut into the nose. First blush, many in the CIA assumed the Turing Lunik was just a model, but some analysts suspected that the Soviets might be sufficiently proud of the spacecraft to bring a real one on tour. These suspicions were confirmed when CIA intelligence agents managed to gain unrestricted access to the spacecraft one night after the exhibit closed. They realized it wasn't a model, it was a real production article. The agents gleaned what they could in 24 hours, but desperately wanted a better look. They wanted to get inside the Lunik, and they went off and did their cloak and dagger stuff. Very interesting. They obviously didn't steal it, but they borrowed it for a little while, and they got the information that apparently they were looking for, and got a pretty good look at a real live lunar satellite. So that is a very interesting story. Again, a real world story that we know happened that shows you just how far the military, the intelligence community will go in order to get hold of advanced foreign technology. And then, of course, we want to double back and talk about Project Azorian. I have mentioned this in the past, and it is popping up from some other people in terms of using this again as kind of an example as far as the lengths that the intelligence community and the military will go in order to get their hands on advanced foreign technology. Azorian, basically, it was a K-129 submarine sunk in the Pacific Ocean, and basically the idea was to dredge it up, lift it up off the ocean floor. They built a ship. There was a cover story basically with the cooperation of Howard Hughes and his Summa Corporation. They couldn't just open up just some startup to do something like this. They needed somebody established with a lot of financing like Hughes, who could credibly say that we're building this ship so we can mine on the ocean floor. This is basically a mining ship, and we're going to be collecting material off the ocean floor. That's what we're really doing. No, they weren't looking for manganese. What they were looking for was a Soviet submarine that sunk to the bottom of the ocean floor. And Hughes was the cover. They built the ship, the Glomar Explorer. When this story came out, very famous. And the ship was built, and of course what they needed was this claw to drop down from the bottom of the ship to the bottom of the ocean to sort of hook onto the submarine and then lift it back up, and then the ship would obviously go back to port. They'd be able to pull out the submarine, and we'd be able to find out everything we needed to know about Soviet submarines. So that it sort of worked out that way. Now, the cost of this particular project was extraordinary. In the early 70s, $800 million. $800 million. That's a very expensive project. In today's money, you're talking about $4 billion, really an extraordinary sum of money. And they were able to go out there. They were able to latch on to that submarine. And in the lifting process, what happened was, unfortunately, for the people who organized this Project Azorian, this Glomar Explorer, the submarine broke in half. So they were only able to pull a small segment of the sub. I guess it was the back end, which is not where the really interesting stuff is, and it was a lot of money spent. Now, a number of different organizations, news organizations, were aware of the story. The CIA was able to kill it with, I believe it might well have been the New York Times. I don't have that in front of me right now. But Jack Anderson, who was an independent syndicated columnist out of D.C., did not go along with that. He broke the story. His feeling was $4 billion for something like this that was ultimately a failure. It was a boondoggle. Again, that's something that's really important to keep in mind if we find out more about some of these UFO projects that may or may not be going on, these unacknowledged special access programs related to UFOs. How much is being spent? That's kind of a key. Are we getting our money's worth? Now, early on when we first found out about ATIP, $22 million over 4 years, that's not that big a deal. But if it adds up over a period of time to tens or hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars, who knows? We don't know because nobody's saying it. And the results are essentially nil. Well, that could be a serious problem. So that's where we're at. Yes, there has been research, at least in the private sector, regarding anomalous fragments that might be ET, but nobody's saying that on the record. I certainly have heard some other things off the record from credible sources, but on the record, nobody's saying that. And we don't want to go there. I mean, I think it's a little hazy. New news as far as that type material is kind of at a standstill, really, over the last 2 years. The only thing that really happened is TTSA did start up their little atom project and did acquire the same Ubatuba magnesium that Valet had required. I guess they're going to retest it. So that's basically where that stands. But again, it is a very interesting story, and you don't get my advice. Don't get carried away with the folks saying, "Oh, this is disclosure," and don't listen to the naysayers either. Say, "There's nothing here." There's something here. It's very interesting, but just my advice: kind of stay centered on this, and don't get too carried away. And finally, if we're going to talk about crash retrievals, we have to talk about the granddaddy of them all, and that is the Roswell case. There is no question that something came down in that area in 1947. It was scooped up by the military, and ultimately it found its way to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Even the Air Force admits as much in their report from the 1990s, requisitioned by then-President Bill Clinton. That's a fact. There's no wild speculation there. Now, when we're talking about crash retrievals, which did come up in the New York Times story, you have to ask yourself, how many of them have there possibly been? We don't really even know right now how many really good UFO cases are floating around out there. Then you have to start asking yourself the question, well, there aren't that enough to really raise alarm bells amongst everyone in the military. A few people, it gets their attention, but not everybody. So there can't be that many. I mean, how many can there possibly be? And then when you get into these crash retrievals, well, certainly the number has to be less than that, whatever the really good UFO case numbers are. And I would say even significantly less than that. But we do know of this one. It is an extraordinary case, and one of the best researchers I know, Anthony Bragalia, has been all over it for years. I strongly recommend that you go and visit his website, UFO Explorations. Just Google it, UFO Explorations, Bragalia, and you will find it. Go to the article archive, and it is an extraordinary treasure trove of information, especially about this case. Lots of other cases too, but this case as well. Now, going through Tony's site regarding some stories that he's written about Roswell, about the memory metal, which we have developed. It's called nitinol. It was developed in the early 1960s. Now, obviously, well after the Roswell case, but I guess it took them a while to get that together. But it does sort of match up with a lot of the descriptions of the debris that was found at Roswell. Very interesting stuff. Now, I've got I cherry-picked through a few of the different articles on or work with titanium that was done in the immediate aftermath of the Roswell crash. And again, cherry-picked a few different quotes from here. Here's one from General Arthur Exon, who was the base commander of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the 60s. And he is stated to researcher Kevin Randall information about the Roswell debris. He told Randall that he understood that some of the UFO debris was comprised of titanium and another metal that they knew about, and the processing was somehow different. Titanium is this is Tony here, titanium is the key metal upon which shape memory alloys such as nitinol are based. And another general, General Shulgin, who led Air Force intelligence at the time of the Roswell incident, authored a secret draft memo 4 months after the crash. In the section to his officers about UFOs entitled Materials of Construction, Shulgin 2 notes such UFO material would be made by unusual fabrication method. Hang on a sec here. Let's, what do we got? And also in an interview conducted during the 90s, again, Arthur Exon here confirmed the existence of the Roswell metal reports. Exon, the base commander of Wright-Patterson in the 60s, related that he was privy to some of the details of the composition of the crash debris. Exon stated of the debris, it was titanium and some other metal that we knew about, and the processing was somehow different. One, of course, special processing of titanium and the other metals is required to create nitinol. Basically, I got a duplicate in there. Sorry about that. From another article, he spoke to a Battelle scientist by the name of Nicholson. In that article, Nicholson said he believed it is most likely that Battelle, the Battelle Memorial Institute, which is located near Wright-Patterson and is one of those private institutes that does a lot of the advanced work for the military, was engaged in such ET debris analysis. He knows the institute had a deep relationship with the U.S. government. It had the proximity to Wright-Pat, and it had the latest, had the talent, equipment, and resources needed to study the Roswell debris. He says there were other indications that Battelle had been contracted to study UFOs even into the 1970s. He maintains that a Battelle superior told him that the CIA was still, at that time, involved in secret UFO studies, as was the Institute. And another quote here. This is actually from an interview that Tony did with the Air Force officer who conducted the Roswell UFO study for the Air Force at the behest of then President Clinton. Based upon the description that I have found for the material nitinol, I would say that the foil-like material used in the Rowan targets of Project Mogul, while flexible, did not meet the description of the characteristics for the alloy nitinol. So, again, if you really want to dig deep and find out, going way back to the beginning, a little bit more about crash debris and analysis that did take place, that over time we have been able to find out about. This is the granddaddy. It's Roswell, and it might be a good time if you haven't brought yourself up to speed on all that. It might be a good time to start taking a closer look. And now let's go to, again, the key alloy in nitinol is, of course, titanium. And as we see here, a symposium on the possibilities that titanium holds for future development, December 1948. And basically, this was hosted by the Office of Naval Research, Department of the Navy. Again, they were all in. Basically, the titanium industry was founded in late 1948, the commercial titanium industry. It did not exist before that. Titanium had obviously been discovered well in advance of that, and in fact a process for the extraction of titanium from the ore, which is a very difficult and expensive process, was developed by an inventor named William Kroll, approximately late 1930s. I'd have to look up the exact date, but the late 1930s. He saw a lot of potential in titanium, but the American metals industry, U.S. Steel, and all those companies really didn't. The reason was because it was so expensive to produce. And basically, the needs of industry and the commercial needs were filled either by, if you needed something strong, you went with steel, which is very heavy, but very strong. And if you needed something lighter, you were able to go with aluminum, which was in fact lighter, but also not very strong at all. It would really break down under a sort of a really, really heavy usage. It would, frankly, it would melt. You couldn't make, let's say, the structure, the skin of a supersonic airplane out of aluminum because it would basically melt. And you could make it out of steel, but again, the steel is so much heavier that you're burning gas. You're really shortening the range of how far a really fast plane could fly. So you needed something that was stronger and lighter. Titanium is or does possess the highest strength to weight ratio of any metal on Earth. And in the late 1940s, finally, we found it, okay? Again, it's very important to keep in mind if you're talking about reverse engineering, talking about the materials is key. And the reason being, this is the first industry that was really as a direct result of reverse engineering alien spacecraft. And I will go through some of my findings on the development of the titanium industry. These are the production numbers from basically a decade's worth from 1945 up to 1956. And what you see is exponential growth over every year. Yeah, there was some interest there. The process process, thanks to Kroll, who did emigrate to the States at the advent of World War II and did go to work for the government. He obviously brought his process with him, and you see a few pounds here, a few pounds there. In the very early days, in the mid-40s, what you saw was, yeah, they're playing around with it. It's a laboratory curiosity, but nobody's really sure what to do with it, and there really is no commercial application. There's no interest there from private industry. Then in 48, a couple of tons are produced. Then the next year, 9 tons are produced. The next year, 23. The next year, 68. Next year, 449. 975. 53, there's over 2,000 tons. 54, almost 5,000 tons. 55, 6,700 tons. And 56, more than 13,000 tons. So you see this exponential increase. And what's very interesting is, at least in the very late 40s, you're in this period in terms of budgeting, and what was being spent by the military is very low. This is after World War II and prior to the Korean War, really even before the Cold War really starts to heat up a little bit. So what you had was very little spending on military, and it was the military that got the titanium, commercial titanium industry started because they were willing to provide REMCrew, which is the first commercial titanium producer. They were able to provide price supports that made it profitable for that company to produce the titanium because of the expense involved, as I've already outlined. So you see that. And then also you get an idea of how much emphasis was put on titanium in its early days of commercial production. Lawrence Foster, writing in his review of titanium and industry, that the exponential growth of metallic titanium production is unparalleled in the history of metallurgy. That's how serious they were about getting titanium going. And in titanium, past, present, and future, the Commission on Engineering and Technical Systems wrote, only in the case of the Manhattan Project for the development of enriched uranium and the atomic bomb has there been a concentration of scientific, technical, and financial support for a single metal, and certainly to a single structural metal, similar to that devoted to titanium. And I've written about this over at my website. I certainly urge you to go over there and take a look at that in a little bit more detail. But here's what you've got. You've got an industry that basically is the doors get opened as a direct result of military spending. You've also got an industry that that money becomes available at a time when there's not a lot of military spending going on, and secondly, nobody within the government really takes any kind of credit for getting this industry going. The money for this had to come from somewhere. It had to be approved by someone. My feeling is it had to come from Harry Truman. I mean, he's the boss. He's the guy who ultimately decides, working with Congress, what the budget is going to be, and the numbers that they were spending on military at that point in time was nothing. Yet there they are, going whole hog into starting or basically underwriting a commercial titanium industry. So these are the things that you're going to want to keep in mind as we go forward. Yes, I think I gave you a little bit more detail about what might be leading to in terms of talking about crash debris and studies of fragments and unacknowledged special access programs. There's a lot more there. There's something there. Don't get too frustrated. Stay the course. Keep your eyes on this. But I'm telling you, there's something to it. It might not be everything that some of the cheerleaders are talking about. This is disclosure and blah 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 and all that. But there's a lot that's out there. There's a lot that some very fine researchers have picked up on over the years, and I think we're going to continue to see that in the months and the years maybe to come. Well worth taking a closer look and bring yourself up to speed, because you're not going to get all this in 1,000 words from the New York Times, and you're not going to get this in quick and dirty Twitter links or even comments over on Facebook. You've really got to take a look at the facts that we know. There's a lot that we don't know. Might speculate a little bit here and there. Nothing wrong with that, so long as you back up your speculation with fact. So that's it for this time, and I'll be back as soon as there's more news. Thankfully, I ran through all this without having to talk about the issues that MUFON is having. And to be honest with you, I think, at least from my perspective, they're going to continue to just simply be a non-factor in the UFO field. Basically, over the last decade, I think most of you know now that the former director, Jan Harzen, was arrested on a couple felony charges related to his attempting to solicit sexual relations from someone that he thought was a 13-year-old girl. Goodbye to Jan. He'll never be back. But certainly MUFON has a lot of work to do. I've seen some things, even in the aftermath of all this, where key people in the organization are just making the same stupid mistakes over and over again. So basically, I've washed my hands of them. If by some miracle they do come up with something worth reporting, of course I'll give it some credit. I'll give them their due. But by and large, I just don't see anything coming out of there, out of that organization, other than increased embarrassment. So let's stay focused on the good stuff, and I will talk to you later. Thanks a lot. You have a great night. Bye-bye now.